I didn't think the sentence that ended my marriage would be said so casually in the middle of an ordinary afternoon while the dishwasher hummed in the background like nothing in the world was wrong. "I need to tell you something," my husband said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. His voice wasn't shaking. That was the first thing that terrified me. I turned around with the dish towel still in my hands. "There's a pregnancy," he said, then paused. "But it's not yours." For a moment, my brain refused to translate the words. Pregnancy, not mine. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I remember gripping the edge of the counter because the room tilted, like gravity had decided to let go of me without warning. He kept talking, explaining, clarifying, justifying, but the words blurred together. All I could see was his face, pale, tense, already bracing for impact, like he knew this would destroy me, but had rehearsed surviving it. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. That's the part everyone remembers. That's the part they judged. To my family, I became the woman who walked away too fast. To his family, I was the cold wife who refused to work through a mistake. To our friends, I was the villain who abandoned a marriage the moment things got complicated. No one asked what I knew. No one asked what I had been carrying in silence for years. They saw a pregnancy and assumed responsibility. They saw divorce papers and assumed cruelty. They didn't know that the announcement hadn't shocked me because of the betrayal alone, but because of what it confirmed. They didn't know there was a reason that pregnancy could never have happened inside my marriage. They didn't know I had been protecting a truth that, once spoken, would collapse more than just my relationship. When I filed for divorce, I became the bad guy overnight. Phones stopped ringing with concern and started buzzing with accusations. His parents called me heartless. My own mother cried and asked what she had done wrong raising me. Our closest friends chose sides without ever hearing mine. I let them. Because once I told the real reason, once the truth finally surfaced, everything changed. And by then, there was no going back. My name is Elena Ward, and I'm 32. If you looked at my life from the outside, you'd probably describe it with words like stable, comfortable, even lucky. I had a steady career as a product analyst for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing flashy, but solid. I had a home with a backyard, a husband with a good job, a calendar filled with birthdays, dinners, work deadlines, and the quiet routines that make a marriage look unbreakable. His name is Adrian. He's 34, and when I met him, he had this calm steadiness that made me feel like the world couldn't knock me over as long as he was nearby. We met our sophomore year of college during a volunteer weekend, one of those community events where you pick up trash, plant trees, and take photos pretending you're the kind of person who always chooses the noble option. Adrian and I ended up assigned to the same team. He made a joke about my old sneakers, and I rolled my eyes. Hard, but I still laughed. Later, he offered me a bottle of water like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I remember thinking, he notices small needs. We started dating a month later, the kind of dating that feels easy. No drama, no games, just late-night study sessions, ramen dinners, and the slow comfort of being chosen every day. After graduation, we moved to the same city. We built our adult life the way people do when they think love is a blueprint. Jobs, savings, shared furniture, holidays, divided evenly between families. We got married 5 years ago. Small wedding, warm lights, his parents crying at the vows, my mother hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. People told me, this is what it's supposed to look like, and for a while I believed them. We talked about kids the way couples talk about the future when they're not ready to touch it yet. Someday, when we're settled, when work calms down. We even picked names, half joking, like it was a harmless game. But there was a shadow living behind all those conversations, a truth I never put fully into words. Before I married Adrian, I found out I had a medical issue, something that meant pregnancy would be complicated. Not impossible in every scenario, but not simple, not guaranteed, not the storybook version. I remember sitting alone in a sterile exam room, staring at a paper gown, folded on a chair, hearing a doctor say things like low probability and treatment options, and feeling my throat close. I told myself I would explain it to Adrian when the time was right, when we were stronger, when we were ready. But the right time is a slippery thing. It moves every time you reach for it. At first, I kept quiet because I was scared. Scared he'd look at me differently. Scared he'd love me less, or worse. stay out of obligation, and quietly resent me. And then, the longer I waited, the heavier it became. Confessing after 6 months felt harder than confessing on day one. After 2 years, it felt like admitting I'd built part of our marriage on omission. So I became the woman who smiled through baby showers, the woman who laughed when his mom said, "You'll understand when you're a mother," the woman who nodded when Adrian's sister teased, "Don't wait too long, okay?" His family had a gentle kind of pressure, the kind that comes wrapped in sweetness, where you feel guilty for being uncomfortable because no one is technically being cruel. My family, on the other hand, pushed more directly. My mother wanted grandchildren like they were proof I'd succeeded at being a woman. She'd ask casually at dinner, "Any news?" like it was normal conversation. And Adrian started changing in small ways. He stayed later at work. He kept his phone face down more often. He'd answer messages with his back turned, shoulders tight, like he didn't want me to see his screen. When I asked if he was okay, he'd smile too quickly and say, "Just stressed. Deadlines." And because I had my own secret, I didn't push. Sometimes I think that's the cruelest irony. I was so busy protecting my truth, I didn't notice I was giving him space to create his. The first time I felt something truly shift, it wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no late-night confession, no slammed doors. It was a Thursday night, rain tapping against the windows. Adrian was sitting on the edge of the couch, scrolling through his phone, thumb moving faster than usual. I asked him if he wanted dinner. "In a minute," he said without looking up. That minute stretched into 45. When I finally sat beside him, he angled the screen away, not aggressively, just instinctively, like someone flinching before they realize they're safe. I noticed it because he'd never done that before. Adrian was always open with his space, his things, his life. I told myself I was being paranoid. Work stress became the excuse for everything. Missed dinners, canceled weekends. The emotional distance I felt growing between us like a quiet wall I couldn't name. His mother started calling more often. She'd ask how Adrian was doing, then pivot gently, almost expertly, to questions about our future. "You know," she said once, her voice warm, "men like Adrian do better when they have something grounding them. A family." I understood what she meant. At a holiday dinner, his sister joked about how long we'd been married and raised her eyebrows theatrically. Everyone laughed. I smiled too, but my hands were clenched under the table. Later that night, I asked Adrian if those comments bothered him. He shrugged. They mean well. But his jaw was tight, and he didn't reach for me in bed. A few weeks later, I noticed something else. Adrian started showering as soon as he got home. Not after sitting down, not after eating. Straight to the bathroom, clothes dropped in a pile, like he was shedding a version of himself before stepping into our shared space. I didn't say anything. I stored the observation in the same quiet place I kept everything else I was afraid to examine too closely. I had my own guilt, my own silence. Who was I to interrogate his? The distance between us grew polite. We spoke kindly. We asked the right questions. We checked the boxes of being a good couple while something essential thinned out between us. Then came the first real crack. We were at a friend's baby shower. Pastel balloons, soft music, everyone passing around tiny socks like sacred artifacts. Adrian sat stiff beside me, barely touching his drink. When someone asked when it would be our turn, he laughed. A short, sharp sound that didn't match the moment. "Sooner than you think," he said. I turned and looked at him, surprised. That was new. On the drive home, I asked what he meant. He kept his eyes on the road. "Nothing. Just joking." But his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. I wondered if he was trying to tell me something, or if he was trying to convince himself of something he'd already decided without me. I replayed moments I'd brushed off. Texts answered too quickly. Calls taken outside. The way he'd stopped talking about work details entirely. At the same time, my own secret grew heavier. The longer I waited to tell him about my fertility issues, the more impossible it felt. I imagined the look on his face, hurt, betrayal, or worse, pity. So we circled each other in silence. Two people protecting truths that were slowly poisoning the same marriage. When Adrian finally told me there was a pregnancy, part of me wasn't shocked. I was devastated. Because in that moment, everything I'd been avoiding finally collided. And I knew, before the words fully landed, that whatever came next would destroy the version of us I had been desperately trying to preserve. The moment didn't arrive with thunder. It came with sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor. dust floating lazily in the air, and the sound of my laptop chiming with a calendar reminder I ignored for the third time that morning. Adrian stood across from me, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket like he needed something to anchor him. He didn't sit down. That should have been my first warning. "I need to tell you something," he said. My stomach dropped before he even finished the sentence. I remember thinking, this is it. Whatever it was, it had finally decided to stop hovering at the edges of my life. "There's a pregnancy." The word felt unreal, like it belonged to another couple, another kitchen, another life. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then he added quietly, almost clinically, "It's not yours." The room tilted. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain out just as quickly, leaving me cold and lightheaded. My fingers slipped on the counter, and I had to brace myself to stay upright. My heart was racing, but everything else seemed frozen. "What?" I finally whispered. He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath for days. "I didn't plan for it to happen. It wasn't supposed to go this far." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the life we'd built. The husband who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sundays. The man who held my hand during stressful meetings, who knew exactly how I took my tea. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated. That pause hurt more than the answer. "It's someone from work." I felt something fracture inside my chest. Not explode, not shatter loudly, just a slow, devastating crack. The kind that doesn't bleed immediately, but changes the shape of everything. "How long?" My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from the wrong body. "A few months," he said. "It wasn't serious, at first." I laughed then, a short, broken sound that startled both of us. "Isn't that always how it starts?" He flinched. He tried to explain. Stress, distance, feeling pressured, feeling lonely, not knowing how to talk to me anymore. Each word landed like an accusation dressed up as confession. And then came the part that sealed everything. "She's keeping the baby." Silence filled the space between us. Thick, final. I thought of all the conversations we'd had about timing, readiness, responsibility. The way he'd once said, "I want kids, but only when we're both ready." The way he'd looked at me when he said it, like readiness was something we'd arrive at together. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. "You told her you're married," I said. "Yes." "And she still expects you to be involved." "Yes." The words pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like work. In that moment, everything rushed forward at once. The distance, the secrecy, the jokes at the baby shower, the late nights. The puzzle pieces slammed together, brutal in their clarity. I realized something else, too. He hadn't told me because he felt guilty. He'd told me because the pregnancy forced his hand. I stood up slowly. "I want a divorce," I said. He blinked, stunned. "Elena." "No." My voice was steady now, sharper than I felt. "I'm not negotiating this. I'm not sharing my marriage with a consequence you created." He ran a hand through his hair, panic creeping into his expression. "We can talk about this. We can go to counseling. I didn't mean for it to destroy us." "But it did," I said. And then, because the universe wasn't finished, I said the sentence that finally cracked him open. "That child can't be mine." He froze. For a second, I thought he might finally understand the weight of everything I'd been carrying alone. Instead, his face filled with confusion. "What do you mean?" I swallowed. "There's a reason this doesn't make sense to me," I said quietly. "A reason I didn't react the way you expected." I didn't explain further. I couldn't, not yet. That night, he slept on the couch. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of a house that no longer felt like mine. 2 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office and signed the papers that officially made me the villain in everyone else's story. By the time the news spread, Elena filed for divorce after her husband announced a pregnancy. No one asked for context. They didn't ask why I walked away. They assumed they already knew. The silence after I filed for divorce was worse than the yelling. For the first 24 hours, no one called. No messages. No accusations. Just a vacuum so complete it made my ears ring. I stayed in the guest room, staring at my phone like it might explain what I had just done if I looked at it long enough. Then the messages started. His mother left the first voicemail. Her voice trembled with disbelief, not grief. "Elena, this doesn't make sense. Adrian made a mistake, yes, but people work through these things. You don't abandon a marriage because of fear." Fear. That word lodged itself in my chest like a thorn. His father followed. Short, controlled, disappointed. He said he expected more maturity from me. More compassion. He reminded me that a child was involved now, and that my reaction would affect more than just my feelings. My own mother called next. She cried so hard I could barely understand her words. She kept asking if I was okay, then immediately asking what I had done wrong to make Adrian stray. She asked if I'd been distant. Too focused on work, not affectionate enough. I didn't answer those questions. I couldn't, because every accusation brushed against the truth I hadn't shared yet, and every silence made me look guiltier. Friends picked sides without asking for my version. Some stopped responding altogether. Others sent carefully worded texts about communication and commitment and not acting rashly. One friend told me, "You don't throw away 5 years because of a single mistake." But it wasn't a single mistake. It was a series of choices, and it collided with a truth I had carried alone for too long. Adrian tried to talk to me the second night after the papers were filed. He knocked on the door softly, like a stranger in his own house. "I know you're angry," he said, "but I need you to explain why this is so final." I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped so tightly my fingers ached. "You didn't just betray me," I said. "You made a life-altering decision without me." He shook his head. "I didn't choose this. But you chose everything that led to it." He went quiet, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "You said that child couldn't be yours. Why?" I closed my eyes. "I can't explain that yet." His expression hardened. "So you're punishing me for something I don't even understand?" I laughed, bitter and sharp. "This isn't punishment. This is protection." "From what?" "From breaking myself trying to survive something I didn't consent to." He stared at me like I was speaking another language. That night, I cried in the shower so he wouldn't hear me. The water masked the sound of my breathing hitching, my chest heaving like it was trying to tear itself open. I asked myself the questions everyone else was already answering for me. Am I being cruel? Am I being selfish? Would a better woman try harder? I replayed the moment he told me about the pregnancy over and over, searching for an alternate version where I reacted differently, where I stayed, where I swallowed my devastation and found a way to adapt. But every version ended the same way, with me disappearing inside myself. The truth was, I had spent years compromising my own needs to protect a future that was already fragile. I had told myself I was being patient, understanding, supportive. But patience without honesty turns into quiet self-erasure. When my father finally called, he didn't yell. He asked one question. "Is there something you're not telling us?" My throat closed. "Yes," I said. "Then you need to tell it," he replied gently, "because right now, everyone thinks you're running away." I wasn't running. I was standing in the wreckage of everything I'd avoided saying, trying to decide whether telling the truth would save me or destroy whatever relationships I had left. I knew once I spoke it aloud, there would be no undoing it, no softening the impact, no version where everyone walked away unhurt. But staying silent was costing me everything anyway. And for the first time since Adrian spoke that sentence in the kitchen, I realized something else. The divorce wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the truth finally demanding to be seen. The moment the divorce filing became public knowledge, the story stopped being mine. It became theirs. Adrian's parents started calling daily, sometimes separately, sometimes together, on speaker, like an intervention I hadn't agreed to attend. They spoke in calm, reasonable tones that somehow hurt more than yelling. "You're reacting emotionally," his mother said. "You're not thinking long term," his father added. "A child deserves stability," they repeated, like a mantra. No one asked whether I did. My family wasn't much better, just quieter in their disappointment. My mother sent long texts reminding me of vows and forgiveness. My sister avoided the topic entirely, which somehow felt worse. Silence has a way of choosing sides without saying a word. Adrian himself changed too. The man who had once looked at me with softness now spoke like someone defending a case. He sent articles about couples surviving infidelity. He suggested therapy. He asked me to delay the divorce until emotions settled. "What happens if I don't?" I asked him once over the phone. A pause, then, "People will think you're heartless." I almost laughed. At work, the tension followed me. A coworker pulled me aside and said carefully, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry. That must be complicated." Her eyes flicked to my stomach instinctively, like she was checking for signs of something I wasn't carrying. Complicated. That was the polite version of wrong. Friends I'd known for years stopped inviting me to things. Others tried to stay neutral, which usually meant checking in on Adrian while telling me they hoped I'd find peace. Peace, apparently, looked like silence. Meanwhile, the pressure escalated. Adrian told me the other woman, her, was asking questions about the divorce timeline, about whether I knew, about what kind of woman walks away when a child is involved. She's scared, he said, like that should soften everything. So am I replied, but I didn't create this. Then came the meeting. Adrian asked me to come to his parents' house to clear the air. Against my better judgment, I went. I told myself I owed them honesty, even if they hadn't earned it. The living room was immaculate. Coffee already poured, tissues on the table, strategically placed like props. They sat across from me, united. "We don't understand why you're being so final," his mother began. "You've always been so rational." Rational, as if emotion negated intelligence. I told them I didn't consent to a future that involved betrayal and permanent entanglement with a third party. His father leaned forward. "Marriage is sacrifice." "Yes," I said, "but sacrifice isn't the same as self-destruction." They exchanged looks. Then his mother said something that snapped something inside me. "You're denying a child the chance to have a complete family." I felt my heartbeat slow. My hands went cold. "No," I said quietly. "I'm refusing to disappear to make others comfortable." She opened her mouth to respond, and I finally interrupted. "There is a reason," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "A medical reason this situation isn't something I can just work through." The room went silent. Adrian's mother blinked. "What do you mean?" I looked at Adrian. He was watching me carefully now, eyes sharp with suspicion. "I can't explain everything today," I said, "but know this, my reaction isn't impulsive, it's informed." His father frowned. "Informed by what?" "By a truth I should have shared years ago," I replied, "and by a betrayal that forced it into the open." Adrian spoke then, frustration creeping into his voice. "You can't keep hiding behind something you won't explain." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm deciding when I'm strong enough to say it." The meeting ended badly. His parents accused me of manipulation, of withholding information to justify cruelty. Adrian accused me, privately, of using secrecy as a weapon. "If there's something that changes everything," he said, "then say it." I didn't, not yet. But that night, alone in my apartment, something shifted. I stopped asking myself whether I was being too much, stopped wondering how to make this easier for everyone else, stopped shrinking my pain to fit their comfort. I opened my laptop and searched for a specialist I'd avoided for years. I scheduled an appointment I'd been postponing since before the wedding. I read the medical files I'd shoved into a drawer and pretended didn't exist. I cried, but differently this time. Not with panic, with clarity, because I finally understood something crucial. Everyone was angry at me for reacting to consequences they didn't fully understand. And once they did, the anger wouldn't disappear, but it would move away from me and toward the truth that had been sitting between all of us, unspoken, heavy, and inevitable. The lowest point didn't come during an argument. It came on a Sunday morning when I realized no one had called me in 3 days. Not to check in, not to ask how I was holding up, not even to tell me I was wrong. The silence felt earned, like a sentence handed down by a jury that had already made up its mind. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest, staring at a half-packed box of my things. The label read bedroom, but it could have said evidence of a life that no longer exists. I hadn't gone back to the house since the night I left. Adrian had sent photos of my things arranged neatly in boxes, like organization could soften abandonment. He told me I could come get them whenever I was ready. I wasn't ready. Every object carried memory. A sweater he bought me on our first trip together, the mug his sister gave us with future parents printed on the side, something I'd laughed off when it arrived. I took it out of the box and stared at it until my chest tightened. I felt like a fraud. Everyone thought I was strong, cold even, decisive, the woman who walked away without hesitation. They didn't see the nights I couldn't breathe. The mornings I sat in my car outside work, hands shaking, trying to convince myself I could still function like a normal person. I replayed my choices endlessly. If I had told him earlier, if I hadn't waited, if I'd been braver. The guilt was a living thing, not about the divorce, but about the secret. I'd convinced myself I was protecting us. But now I wondered if I'd simply delayed the inevitable. That night I called my sister. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail I erased twice before finally sending. "I don't need you to agree with me," I said quietly. "I just need you to know I'm not okay." She texted back an hour later. "I love you. I just don't know what to say right now." Neither did I. The next day I met with the specialist. Sitting in that sterile room, listening to a doctor explain my condition again, more clearly, more definitively, felt like reopening a wound I'd tried to cauterize with denial. "Pregnancy would be extremely unlikely without intervention," she said gently. And even with treatment, there are risks. I nodded, hands folded tightly in my lap. I left the appointment with a folder of information and the strange sensation that the ground beneath me had finally given way. Not because the news was new, but because I could no longer pretend it wasn't shaping my life. That evening, Adrian called. I almost didn't answer. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been surviving," I replied. There was a long pause. "I told my parents you were hiding something," he said. "They think you're using it as an excuse." "I'm not," I said, my voice cracking. "But I can't keep being interrogated while I bleed internally." His voice softened. "Then tell me." I closed my eyes. "I can't yet." He exhaled sharply. "You're asking everyone to trust you without giving them anything. And you asked me to trust you while you slept with someone else," I shot back. Silence. "I didn't mean it like that," he said finally. "I know," I whispered. "That's the worst part." After the call ended, I curled up on the bed and sobbed into a pillow until my throat burned. The kind of crying that doesn't ask for comfort. It just empties you out until there's nothing left to hold. That was the night I admitted something to myself. I wasn't afraid of losing Adrian anymore. I was afraid of losing myself, of letting this story define me as the villain when the truth was far more complicated, far more human. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. To my parents, to his parents, to the friends who had turned away, to Adrian. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I wrote the words I'd been avoiding for years. I named my condition. I explained what it meant. I described the years of silence, the fear, the shame. When I finished, I stared at the screen, tears blurring the letters. This was the moment before the fall, or the rise. Either way, I couldn't stay here. At the bottom. Invisible. Misunderstood. I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and saved the draft. Tomorrow, I would decide who deserved to hear the truth, and whether I was finally ready to let it change everything. I didn't plan the moment. It wasn't dramatic. There was no perfect timing, no cinematic pause where everyone leaned in and finally understood me. The truth came out because I was too tired to keep holding it in. Adrian called again 2 days later. His voice sounded different, less defensive, more worn down. "My parents want answers," he said. "So do I." I looked at the draft email glowing on my laptop screen. The words I'd written in the dark when I had nothing left to lose. "Then listen," I said. "Not to argue, not to fix, just listen." He agreed. That night, we met in a neutral place, a small counseling office the lawyer had recommended for mediation. Beige walls, soft chairs, a box of tissues between us that felt insultingly predictable. He sat across from me, hands clasped, jaw tight. I took a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deep and ancient. "There's a reason that pregnancy didn't make sense to me," I said, "and it has nothing to do with shock or denial." He nodded slowly. "Before we got married," I continued, "I was diagnosed with a condition that makes natural pregnancy extremely unlikely. I didn't tell you because I was afraid, and then I waited too long, and then I was ashamed." His face drained of color. "I've lived for years knowing that becoming a mother would never be simple for me," I said. Every joke, every comment, every expectation, I swallowed it, quietly. He leaned forward, eyes wide. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want to be reduced to it," I said. "I didn't want you to stay out of obligation or leave out of disappointment." The room was silent, except for his breathing. "When you told me about the pregnancy," I went on, "I didn't just hear betrayal. I heard confirmation that everything I'd been carrying alone was suddenly irrelevant, that the future I was supposed to work through would always center someone else's choices." He looked like he'd been punched. "I never meant to." "I know," I said gently, "but intent doesn't erase impact." For the first time since this began, I saw something crack in him that wasn't defensiveness. Understanding. Not absolution, not forgiveness, but recognition. Later that week, I sent the email. Not to everyone. Just to my parents, his parents, and 2 friends who had written me off without asking. I didn't dramatize it, I didn't beg, I didn't justify my divorce. I stated facts. My diagnosis, my silence, the years of pressure, the moment the pregnancy shattered what was already fragile. The responses came fast and uneven. My mother called sobbing, apologizing for every comment she'd ever made about grandchildren. My father was quiet, then said, "I wish you'd trusted us sooner, but I understand why you didn't." Adrian's parents reacted differently. His mother cried, not out of empathy, but shock. His father was silent for days, then sent a short message. "We didn't know. That changes things." That was it. But something remarkable happened after the truth was out. The narrative shifted. Friends who had judged me started reaching out, awkwardly, carefully. Some apologized outright. Others said they hadn't realized how much I'd been carrying. And the anger? It didn't disappear. It moved. Toward Adrian. Toward the secrecy. Toward the system that had expected me to absorb pain quietly. For the first time, I wasn't defending myself. I was being believed. Adrian and I finalized the divorce without a fight. No public battles, no drawn-out cruelty, just the quiet ending of something that couldn't survive what it had become. On the day I signed the final papers, I didn't cry. I felt steady, like someone who had walked through fire and come out scorched, but intact. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. I had stopped apologizing for protecting myself, and no one could take that from me. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, small moments that, stitched together, revealed how thoroughly the ground beneath Adrian had shifted. At first, people treated him gently, carefully, like a man who had made a mistake but didn't deserve punishment. They asked if he was holding up okay, if he was excited but scared, if he was doing the best he could in a complicated situation. But once the truth surfaced, once people understood why my reaction had been so final, the tone changed. Subtly, then unmistakably. Friends who had defended him stopped returning his calls as quickly. Invitations became less frequent. Conversations that once flowed easily grew strained, peppered with long silences and unfinished sentences. I wasn't there to witness most of it, and that was the strangest part. I didn't have to do anything. The truth did the work for me. His parents stopped calling me, not out of anger, but embarrassment. His mother sent one final message, carefully worded, apologizing for the assumptions we made. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't push for reconciliation. She simply acknowledged that they had misjudged me. Adrian told me later, during one of our last necessary conversations about paperwork, that his father had asked him a question that cut deeper than any accusation. "Did you know she was carrying that alone all those years?" Adrian hadn't answered. Work became uncomfortable for him too. The pregnancy, once a point of whispered excitement, became an unspoken complication. Colleagues avoided asking questions. HR scheduled meetings that were suddenly more formal. People looked at him differently, not with cruelty, but with a kind of recalibration, as if they were quietly reassessing the man they thought they knew. I moved apartments, not because I had to, but because I wanted a space untouched by shared history. Somewhere my life didn't echo with the ghost of what could have been. On my first night there, I sat on the floor eating takeout from the container, surrounded by unpacked boxes, and felt something unexpected. Peace. Not joy, not triumph. Just relief. I wasn't constantly bracing anymore. I wasn't rehearsing explanations in my head. I wasn't scanning rooms for judgment. Adrian tried once to talk about what might have been. He asked if, in another universe, things could have worked. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, not without honesty and not without choice. He nodded. He didn't argue. That was the last personal conversation we had. Mutual friends adjusted. Some faded quietly out of my life. Others reappeared, humbled, admitting they'd chosen comfort over curiosity when they sided against me. I didn't punish them. I just noticed who stayed. And then there were moments that felt almost surreal. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at a cafe, someone who had once told me I was overreacting. She looked at me, hesitated, then said, "I didn't know what to say back then, but I'm glad you didn't stay." That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just recognition. I never gloated. Never corrected people publicly, never told my side unless asked. And somehow that restraint carried more weight than any dramatic confrontation ever could. Adrian's life didn't fall apart, but it didn't continue smoothly either. He became the man who had to explain himself again and again to new people who heard fragments of the story and filled in the gaps with raised eyebrows and careful distance. I became something else. Not a victim, not a villain. A woman who chose herself when silence would have been easier. When I heard that he had moved in with the woman who was pregnant, I felt nothing. No jealousy, no bitterness, just a quiet understanding that choices don't vanish when the story ends. They continue. So do we. And while his world adjusted to the consequences of decisions he couldn't undo, mine began to expand, not outwardly, but inwardly. I slept better. I breathed deeper. I trusted myself again. And that, more than anything, felt like justice. I used to think strength meant endurance, staying quiet, staying agreeable, absorbing discomfort so other people could remain comfortable. That's what I did for years, smiling through questions, deflecting expectations, carrying truths that felt too heavy to share. I told myself that love required sacrifice and that patience was proof of maturity. What no one tells you is that silence can look like strength, right up until it starts erasing you. The end of my marriage wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. The worst thing would have been staying, shrinking myself further to survive a future built on betrayal and unspoken pain. I didn't leave because I was angry. I left because I finally understood that choosing myself wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Today my life is quieter. There are fewer people in it, but the ones who remain know the full version of me. Not the edited one, not the convenient one. I still don't know exactly what my future looks like. I don't know if motherhood will ever be part of my story, or if it will take a form I never imagined. I don't know who I'll become next. But I know this: I will never again trade my truth for someone else's comfort. If you're listening to this and you're standing at a crossroads, being told you're overreacting, that you're too emotional, that you should stay quiet for the sake of peace, ask yourself one question. Whose peace? Because peace that costs you your voice isn't peace. It's a slow disappearance. Walking away doesn't make you weak. Telling the truth late doesn't make you a liar. Protecting yourself doesn't make you selfish. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is stop apologizing for choosing her own life. And if people only understand your decision after they know the whole truth, that doesn't mean you were wrong. It means you were strong enough to stand alone until the truth caught up.